I moved to Willowbrook Estates 6 months ago, drawn by the pristine lawns and the promise of a quiet suburban life. The neighborhood seemed perfect until I met Karen Hendricks, the H.O.A. president who treated her position like she was running a small dictatorship. Karen was the kind of woman who measured grass height with a ruler and kept a clipboard of violations wherever she went. My golden retriever Max was a gentle giant who had been my companion for 8 years. He was well-trained, friendly, and had never shown an ounce of aggression toward anyone. But Karen decided from day one that Max was a menace to her carefully controlled community. It started with noise complaints about his occasional barking when the mailman arrived, which lasted maybe 30 seconds and happened around noon when most people were at work. I tried being reasonable. I installed a bark collar and made sure Max stayed inside during early morning and evening hours. I even brought Karen homemade cookies and apologized for any disturbance. But Karen wasn't interested in solutions. She was interested in control, and she had found her latest target. The complaints escalated quickly. Karen claimed Max was intimidating children, even though the neighborhood kids loved him and asked to pet him during our walks. She filed reports saying he was running loose, though Max was always leashed and I had security cameras proving it. She even tried to claim he was damaging H.O.A. property by walking on the grass strips between sidewalks. What Karen didn't know was that I had recently sold my tech startup for a considerable sum. I had chosen this neighborhood specifically because I wanted to focus on my next venture, a legal consulting firm specializing in property law. I had connections throughout the legal system and more resources than my modest ranch house suggested. The situation reached a breaking point 3 weeks ago when Karen knocked on my door with an official-looking document. She stood there in her pressed khakis and H.O.A. blazer, clipboard in hand, with that smug expression she wore whenever she thought she had won. Karen, this is your final notice. The H.O.A. board has voted unanimously to classify your dog as a dangerous animal under our community guidelines. You have 30 days to remove the animal from the premises, or we will be forced to contact animal control and have it disposed of. I stared at her in disbelief. Karen, Max has never bitten anyone or shown any aggressive behavior. You can't just decide he's dangerous because you don't like dogs. The H.O.A. covenants clearly state that any animal deemed a threat to community safety must be removed. I have documented evidence of multiple violations and complaints. The decision is final. She handed me the document with a satisfied smile. As I read through it, I realized she had manipulated every minor incident into evidence of dangerous behavior. A friendly tail wag became lunging at children. Max's excitement when seeing other dogs became aggression toward animals. Even his natural curiosity about squirrels was twisted into predatory stalking behavior. That night I made some phone calls. My attorney confirmed that the H.O.A.'s definition of dangerous animal was broad enough to potentially support their action, especially if they could demonstrate a pattern of complaints. But he also mentioned something interesting about the property records for Willowbrook Estates. I spent the next 2 weeks doing research while publicly playing the role of a concerned homeowner trying to comply with H.O.A. demands. I attended board meetings, submitted appeals, and even offered to build a 6-foot privacy fence at my own expense. Karen shot down every reasonable solution with bureaucratic efficiency. Meanwhile, I was quietly exploring the ownership structure of our neighborhood. What I discovered was fascinating. Willowbrook Estates had been developed by Meridian Properties, but the original developer had retained ownership of several key parcels, including the community center, the main entrance, and most importantly, the private road that connected our neighborhood to the main thoroughfare. Through a series of shell companies, Meridian had been planning to sell these parcels to the H.O.A. for $1 each once the neighborhood was fully developed. However, they had never completed the transfer. The properties were still owned by Meridian, which had gone through several ownership changes over the years. After some investigation, I discovered that Meridian Properties was now owned by a holding company that was in financial distress. They were quietly liquidating assets to pay creditors. The Willowbrook parcels were sitting in their portfolio, forgotten and unnoticed. I made an offer through my attorney to purchase all of Meridian's remaining Willowbrook holdings for $200,000. To a company facing bankruptcy, it was easy money for properties they had forgotten they owned. The sale closed quickly and quietly. Karen continued her campaign against Max, completely oblivious to what I had been doing. She started leaving threatening notes on my door and taking pictures of Max during our walks. She even convinced two neighbors to sign statements saying they felt unsafe around my dog. Yesterday morning, Karen showed up at my door with an animal control officer and a court order. She was practically glowing with triumph as she explained that I had failed to comply with the H.O.A directive and that Max would be seized immediately. I gave you 30 days, and you chose to ignore the H.O.A's authority. Officer Martinez here will be taking your dog to the county facility, where dangerous animals are properly handled. The animal control officer looked uncomfortable but handed me the paperwork. Karen stood behind him, arms crossed, savoring her victory. That's when I smiled and pulled out my own folder of documents. Actually, Karen, there's been an interesting development. As of yesterday, I own the private road that provides the only access to Willowbrook Estates. I also own the community center where you hold your H.O.A meetings, and the entrance gate that displays our neighborhood name. Karen's expression shifted from triumph to confusion. That's impossible. Those properties belong to the H.O.A. No, they belong to Meridian Properties, which never completed the transfer. I purchased them from Meridian's creditors last week. And as the new owner, I'm implementing some changes to protect the safety and welfare of all residents. I handed her a formal notice prepared by my attorney. Effective immediately, all H.O.A board members are banned from the community center and the private road due to their history of harassment and intimidation toward residents. This includes you, Karen. The animal control officer was reading over my shoulder, clearly trying to understand what was happening. Karen was scanning the documents, her face growing paler with each page. You can't do this. I live here. The H.O.A has authority. The H.O.A has authority over individual homeowners, but I now control the infrastructure that makes this neighborhood accessible. Your house is still yours, Karen, but accessing it requires crossing my private road. And I'm afraid I can't allow someone who threatened to have my dog killed to use my property. Karen's eyes widened as the full implications hit her. She lived at the back of the neighborhood, down a cul-de-sac that was only accessible via the main private road I now owned. Without access to that road, she was completely trapped. This is illegal. You can't prevent me from reaching my home. Actually, I researched this extensively. As a private road owner, I have the right to restrict access to anyone I deem a threat to safety. Your documented harassment of residents, abuse of H.O.A authority, and threats against pets constitute a clear threat. My attorney assures me this is completely legal. The animal control officer was slowly backing away, recognizing this was far beyond his jurisdiction. Karen was frantically flipping through the documents looking for some loophole or error. But the H.O.A meetings, the community center, will need to find a new venue. As I mentioned, H.O.A board members are no longer welcome at my community center due to their pattern of harassment. You're welcome to hold meetings at someone's house, assuming they can access their property. Karen's voice was rising to a near shriek. You can't shut down the entire H.O.A. I'm not shutting it down. I'm simply exercising my property rights, just like you were exercising your H.O.A authority. The other residents are welcome to use the road and facilities. Just not you, Karen. Not you. The realization was dawning on her face like a slow-motion disaster. She had pushed and pushed, using every rule and regulation to try to destroy my dog and force me out of the neighborhood. Now those same rules, that same system of property rights and legal authority she had wielded like a weapon, had been turned against her. Karen stood there in my doorway, clutching her clipboard and her court order, finally understanding that her reign of petty tyranny had just ended. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, and finally, the dawning horror of someone who had just realized they had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered.